The envelope arrived 3 weeks after my mother's funeral. Plain brown paper, no return address, postmarked from Kaliningrad. Inside, a single black and white photograph I had never seen before. My parents on their wedding day, 1962, standing before a nondescript building that wasn't the registry office my mother had always described. Behind them, barely visible in the frame's edge, stood a man in a dark suit watching them with the flat, assessing gaze I would later recognize as tradecraft. My name is Katya Volkov, and I believed I knew my parents' story. My father, Viktor Volkov, an engineer at a textile factory in Leningrad. My mother, Anna, a schoolteacher who spoke flawless English, learned from her grandmother. They met at a workers' cultural center in 1961, married quickly as young people did in those optimistic Khrushchev years, and built a quiet Soviet life in a communalka apartment that smelled of cabbage and old books. But the photograph suggested something else entirely, something wrong. I stood in my mother's apartment, now mine, surrounded by the archaeological layers of her life. 67 years compressed into furniture, clothing, papers. The February light through the window was weak, grey, the color of institutional walls. Outside, the Soviet Union was unraveling. Gorbachev spoke of glasnost and perestroikov. The Berlin Wall had fallen 4 months earlier. People were saying things aloud they'd only whispered for decades, and my mother had chosen that moment to die. Heart attack, the doctors said. Quick, no suffering. But I wondered if she'd simply decided she couldn't face what was coming, the exposure, the questions, the end of all the careful lies. I found the first document 2 days later, tucked inside a cookbook that had never been used. The pages were pristine except for one. A recipe for Georgian khachapuri that was actually a cipher key, written in the margin in my mother's neat hand. Directorate S, case file 847K, legend Viktor Volkov, textile engineer. Directorate S. Even I knew what that meant. The KGB's most secretive department, responsible for illegals, deep cover agents living abroad or in manufactured identities within the Soviet Union itself. Sleepers, legends, people who weren't who they claimed to be. I sat on the kitchen floor, the cookbook open in my lap, and felt 36 years of memory begin to collapse. Every birthday, every school performance where my father applauded from the audience, every summer at the dacha, which of it was real? Which of it was performance? The apartment was silent except for the radiator's hiss and the distant sound of a neighbor's television. I forced myself to breathe, to think systematically. I was a researcher at the Institute of History, trained to examine evidence dispassionately. I could do this. I had to do this. I began searching methodically. The desk drawers yielded nothing suspicious. Bills, letters, my school reports. But the wardrobe, the heavy Soviet-era monstrosity that had dominated their bedroom for decades, held secrets in its construction. Behind the false back panel, the kind used in thousands of Soviet apartments for hiding valuables from thieves or informers, I found a metal box. Inside, 2 passports I'd never seen, both for my mother but with different names. Lydia Mikhailovna Sokolova, Elena Petrovna Orlova. The photographs were her, younger, with different hairstyles. The birth dates varied by 3 years. Travel stamps from Helsinki, East Berlin, Prague, cities she'd never mentioned visiting. And beneath the passports, a letter addressed to me, in my mother's handwriting. The envelope simply said, "For Katya, when you're ready to understand." My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was dated March 1988, written in the months before the doctors found the tumor they thought they'd successfully removed. She must have known it would come back. Must have known she was running out of time to decide what truth I deserved. "My darling Katya," it began, "if you're reading this, I am gone, and you have started to discover what I could never tell you while I lived. Please know that everything I did believing it was necessary. We were different people then, in a different world. The war, the great patriotic war, had ended less than 20 years before your father and I met. We had lost 27 million people. We believed the Americans wanted to finish what Hitler had started. We believed we were protecting the motherland. The letter continued. Your father and I were brought together by the Committee for State Security in the winter of 1961. We did not choose each other. We were chosen for each other for operational compatibility, complementary cover stories, and acceptable genetic profiles for producing a child who would appear unremarkably Soviet. Our marriage was a legend, constructed by specialists in Directorate S, who understood that a family man arouses less suspicion than a single operative. I read the words 3 times before their meaning fully penetrated. My parents hadn't fallen in love. They'd been assigned to each other like equipment, like codebooks, like weapons. We met for the first time in a safe house on Vasilyevsky Island, my mother's letter continued. Your father was 26, I was 23. We were given 3 months to construct our cover identities, memorize each other's fabricated histories, and learn to behave as a couple who had courted naturally. They photographed us constantly during training, creating the family album you grew up looking at. The wedding photograph, you know, was taken at a rehearsal. The real wedding, the legal one, happened at a KGB facility outside the city, with only our handlers present. The room seemed to tilt. Every photograph I'd treasured, every story my mother had told about their courtship, manufactured. Theatrical productions for an audience of one, me, their unwitting child, the final proof of their legend's authenticity. Our mission, the letter said, was to serve as a support mechanism for other operations. Your father's position at the textile factory gave him access to certain supply chains used for smuggling materials and documents. My teaching position allowed me to identify and assess potential recruitment targets among students and their families. We were infrastructure, not glamorous, but essential. And we were to maintain this life indefinitely, raising a family that would never suspect the truth. I thought of my father, who died when I was 19, supposedly of liver disease, Viktor Volkov, who taught me chess and always smelled of machine oil and tobacco, who read Pushkin aloud in the evenings and built me a bookshelf for my 8th birthday. Had any of that affection been real? Or was I simply part of his cover, a prop in his performance of normalcy? My mother's letter seemed to anticipate the question. You are wondering if we loved you, Katya. The answer is yes. You were not planned. Our orders were to wait 5 years before having children, but when I discovered I was pregnant in 1953, neither of us reported it immediately. We kept the secret for 3 months, which in our world was a profound act of defiance. When we finally told our handlers, they were furious but pragmatic. A child would strengthen our cover, so they allowed it. Allowed you. Allowed me. As if my existence required permission from men in offices who dealt in secrets and lies. But here is what the committee did not anticipate, my mother wrote. Children change you. The moment I held you, something in me shifted. Your father felt it too. I saw it in his eyes that first night in the hospital. You were real in a way nothing else in our constructed life was real. You became the thing we were actually protecting, not the abstract motherland or the socialist future, but you, your small, specific, miraculous life. I wiped my eyes, surprised to find them wet. Outside it was snowing now, the flakes visible against the darkening sky. The radiator clanked and hissed. Somewhere in the building, someone was playing Vysotsky on a tape deck, his gravelly voice singing about wolves and freedom. The letter concluded, "There is more to discover, Katya. I have left you the means to find it if you choose." Behind the photograph of your father's parents, the one in the living room, you will find a key. It opens a storage unit at Facility 437, Vasilyevsky Island. Everything is there, the operational files I kept, the documents I was supposed to destroy when your father died but couldn't. I preserved them because someone should know the truth. I chose you to be that someone. I'm sorry, my darling. I'm sorry for all the lies, and I'm sorry for this burden, but you are strong enough to carry it. You were always stronger than both of us. With all my love, which was real, always real. Your mother, Anna. I sat in the darkness as the hours passed, holding the letter, trying to reconcile the mother I'd known with the woman who'd written these words. The woman who'd lived a lie so complete that her own child had been part of the deception. Finally, I stood and walked to the living room. The photograph hung where it always had. My father's parents, stern-faced peasants from somewhere in the Urals, both dead before I was born. I'd never questioned their existence. Now I wondered if they'd existed at all. I removed the frame from the wall. Behind it, taped to the back, was a small key with a numbered tag, 437K18. The same designation from the cookbook cipher, 847K. My mother had left me a roadmap. The question was whether I had the courage to follow it to the truth. Facility 437 occupied an entire block on Vasilyevsky Island's western edge, a brutalist concrete structure built in the 1950s to house infrastructure for Leningrad's expanding port operations. At least, that was the official purpose. The storage units in the basement told a different story. Rows of reinforced doors with sophisticated locks, climate control systems far beyond what was needed for spare machinery, and security protocols that required 3 forms of identification just to enter the building. I arrived at 7 in the morning, when the city was still grey and half asleep. The guard at the entrance, a weathered man in his 60s who'd probably held this position since the facility opened, examined my identification with the thorough boredom of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. "Unit K-18?" he asked, consulting a ledger that was probably older than me. "Yes." He made a notation, then looked at me with something that might have been recognition. "You're Anna Mikhailovna's daughter. I was sorry to hear about her passing. She was a regular here, once a month like clockwork, always alone." The casual revelation stunned me. My mother had maintained this secret for decades, visiting a facility I'd never heard of, accessing files I'd never suspected existed. How many hours of her life had been spent in this basement, tending the archive of her double life? The guard handed me a visitor badge. "You know the way?" "No." "Basement level 3. Take the service elevator. The main one's being repaired. Turn left, then follow the corridor to the end. K section will be on your right." The service elevator was a cage of wire mesh that descended with grinding reluctance, revealing layer after layer of the building's foundation. The air grew colder, drier. By the time I reached basement level 3, I could see my breath. The corridor was lit by bare bulbs, spaced at intervals that created pools of light and shadow. My footsteps echoed on concrete. Somewhere in the distance, machinery hummed, ventilation systems maybe, or pumps managing groundwater. The sound was oddly comforting, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this subterranean maze. K-section was marked by a steel door with a simple plaque. I used the key my mother had left me, and the lock opened with a smoothness that suggested recent maintenance. Inside was a room perhaps 3 meters square, lined with metal shelving. File boxes, neatly labeled in my mother's handwriting, filled every available space. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, overwhelmed by the physical evidence of her secret life. Then I stepped inside, closed the door, and began to read. The first box contained my parents' operational files from 1961-1962, the period of their courtship and marriage. The documents were typed on thin paper with carbon copies, marked with classification stamps and handler signatures. Reading them was like watching my parents' relationship dissected by clinical observers who cared nothing for human emotion and everything for operational security. Subject Victor and Subject Anna demonstrated acceptable compatibility during initial assessment period, one report noted. Both subjects maintain emotional discipline appropriate to their assignments. Victor displays stable temperament and reliable adherence to protocol. Anna shows superior linguistic aptitude and natural charm, valuable for social engineering operations. Recommendation: proceed with pairing under Legend Package 847K. Another document detailed their training regimen. Subjects attended joint sessions covering married life simulation, coordinated cover story maintenance, communication protocols for domestic environments, and emergency separation procedures. Anna required additional coaching on displaying appropriate affection levels in public settings. Victor adapted quickly to role requirements. Both subjects successfully completed the Legend integration assessment. I tried to imagine my mother, young, idealistic, probably terrified, learning how to fake being in love, how to touch another human being with calculated spontaneity, how to build a marriage that was really a mission. What had they felt during those training sessions? Resentment? Resignation? Or had they already begun the process of believing their own lies, the only way to make the performance sustainable over decades? The second box held financial records. Payments from accounts I couldn't trace, coded disbursements that probably represented operational funding. My parents had lived modestly but not impoverished. Someone had ensured they had enough to maintain their cover without drawing attention through either poverty or excess. The third box contained the operational logs, terse entries documenting activities that sounded mundane but carried encrypted significance. January 15, 1964. Victor attended technical conference, Moscow. Package delivered per protocol. March 8, 1967. Anna hosted English conversation group. Subject Blackbird identified. Assessment ongoing. November 12, 1969. Victor facilitated transit. Estonian material. Copenhagen connection established. Hidden in these dry, bureaucratic sentences were espionage operations that probably spanned continents, documents that might have altered geopolitical outcomes, people whose lives were disrupted or destroyed by my parents' careful work. And through it all, they come home to our apartment, made dinner, helped me with homework, maintained the fiction of ordinary Soviet life. The fourth box held personal documents, the real ones, not the cover story versions. Here, I found my mother's actual birth certificate. Born in Smolensk in 1937, not Leningrad as she'd always claimed. Her father had been a mid-level party official purged during the Yezhovshchina in 1938. Her mother died of typhus during the war. Anna had been raised in a state orphanage, educated at a special academy for children of fallen officials who showed promise and, crucially, had no family connections that might compromise their loyalty. The perfect candidate for intelligence work, talented, rootless, owing everything to the state that had saved her from complete destitution. My father's real documents told a similar story. Born Viktor Anatoly Strelkov, not Volkov, in Stalingrad in 1935, orphaned during the battle that destroyed the city. Raised in military academies, selected for intelligence training at age 20. His entire adult life had been spent in service to the committee, first as a courier, then as a support operative, finally as a deep-cover illegal living a manufactured existence in his own country. They'd both been made into weapons, shaped by trauma and institutional machinery, into people who could sublimate their own identities for the greater purpose. Except, according to my mother's letter, something had broken in that machinery when I was born. The fifth box contained photographs, hundreds of them, documenting operations and meetings I would never fully understand. But scattered among the surveillance images and operational documentation were personal photographs that had never made it into our family albums. My mother, visibly pregnant, sitting alone in what looked like a safe house, staring at the camera with an expression I couldn't read. My father holding me as an infant, his face unguarded in a way I'd never seen, showing something that looked like wonder or fear or both. And then, near the bottom of the box, a series of photographs from 1978, when I was 15. They showed me leaving school, walking home, sitting in a cafe with friends. Surveillance photographs taken with telephoto lenses from concealed positions. Someone had been watching me. The attached report explained why. Subject Katya, age 15, daughter of operatives Victor and Anna, demonstrates high intellectual aptitude and language facility similar to maternal profile. Preliminary assessment suggests potential for future recruitment. Recommendation: continue observation. Maintain agents' ignorance of this evaluation to prevent emotional compromise of primary operation. My stomach dropped. The KGB had been assessing me, cataloging my capabilities, evaluating whether I would follow my parents into a life of secrets and lies. And my parents, if the report was accurate, hadn't known. They'd been kept in the dark while their employers studied their daughter like a specimen. I found my mother's response in the next file, dated 3 weeks after the surveillance report. It was handwritten, not typed, marked as a personal communication to her handler. I am writing to formally request that my daughter be excluded from any recruitment consideration. Katya is to live a normal life, free from operational obligations. This is non-negotiable. If the committee cannot accept these terms, I will consider myself released from further service. I have given 20 years to this work. I am asking for one thing in return: my daughter's freedom. The reply, stamped 2 days later, was brief. Request denied. All children of operatives remain potential assets. Subject Katya's development will continue to be monitored. Any attempt to compromise operational security through unilateral withdrawal will result in full consequences per regulations. Handler Krasnov. My mother must have felt trapped absolutely. She couldn't quit without bringing consequences on all of us. She couldn't tell me the truth without violating the secrecy that kept us safe. So she'd done the only thing she could. She'd stayed in place, maintained her cover, and tried to guide me toward a life that would make me useless to the committee. Academic research in history, politically neutral, intellectually engaged, but operationally irrelevant. It had worked. I'd never been approached, never recruited. I'd lived the normal life she'd fought to secure for me. The 6th box held the final documents, dated 1983-1988, the years after my father's death. Without her partner, my mother had been restructured into a different kind of asset. Talent spotter, meeting coordinator, document courier, less glamorous, lower risk, suitable for an aging operative whose legend had run its course. But embedded in these routine files was evidence of something else. My mother had been copying documents, photographing pages before returning them, building her own archive. Why? Insurance, evidence, a confession she could never speak aloud. The last document in the box was a note in her handwriting, dated December 1988, 3 months before her death. If Katya is reading this, she knows the truth, or some of it. The truth is more complicated than any files can capture. Victor and I were assigned to each other, yes. We were told to create a marriage that was really a cover story. But somewhere in the performance, something real emerged. I can't pinpoint when it happened. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe it was the moment I told him I was pregnant and saw his face change. But it happened. We fell in love with our own lie, or maybe we fell in love despite it. By the end, I couldn't tell the difference, and I don't think he could either. That's the secret the committee never understood. You can't fully control human beings. You can direct them, manipulate them, threaten them, but you can't stop them from finding authentic connection in the margins of your carefully designed operations. Katya You were born from a lie, but you were raised with love. Please believe that. Please remember us as more than what these files suggest we were. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage room, surrounded by the documentary evidence of my parents' double lives, and cried for the first time since my mother's funeral. Not tears of betrayal, though I felt that too. Tears of recognition. My mother had spent 30 years performing a role, and somewhere in that performance, she'd discovered who she actually was. She'd been given a script: loyal Soviet operative, dedicated wife, unquestioning instrument of state security, and she'd improvised something human within its constraints. She'd made a real marriage out of a fake one, real love out of an operational necessity, a real family out of a legend. And then she'd preserved the evidence, left me the key, trusted me to understand the complexity of what she'd done and who she'd been. I stayed in that storage room until the guard knocked on the door to tell me the facility was closing. I gathered the most important documents, my parents' real birth certificates, the photographs that had never been official, my mother's final note, and locked the rest back in place. I wasn't ready to destroy this archive, but I wasn't ready to fully inhabit it either. Outside, Leningrad, soon to reclaim its old name, Petersburg, was dark and cold, the February wind cutting through inadequate clothing. I walked home slowly, carrying my mother's secrets, trying to imagine what I would do with this knowledge. The Soviet Union was ending. Soon these files, these operations, these carefully maintained lies would seem like artifacts from an ancient world. But the human consequences would remain. The children of operatives discovering their families were constructions, the marriages that were assignments, the loves that were legends until they weren't. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my mother's apartment, and stood at the window looking out at the city she'd lived in but never fully belonged to, because she'd spent her entire adult life being someone she wasn't. Except she had belonged. In the margins, in the improvisation, in the real love she'd built from fake foundations. That was the truth that mattered. That was what I would remember. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, hand-delivered by a courier who vanished before I could ask questions. Inside, 3 sheets typed on an old mechanical typewriter, unsigned but carrying unmistakable authority. Katya Mikhailovna, your recent activities have been noted. The documents you discovered belong to a closed operational chapter. However, these are not normal circumstances. The structures that created your parents' situation are being dismantled. I was your mother's handler for 18 years. My name is Krasnov. If you wish to understand what your parents actually did and why, meet me at the address below. Come alone. This offer expires in 1 week. I arrived on Saturday afternoon. The man inside was perhaps 70, compact and weathered, dressed in worn sweater and slippers. His face showed the hardness of someone who'd spent a lifetime calculating other people's lives, but his eyes showed something unexpected: regret. You look like her, he said. Same bone structure, same way of standing, like you're bracing for impact. Sit. I made tea. Finally, Krasnov spoke. Your mother was one of the most competent operatives I ever handled. Natural talent, perfect emotional control, absolute reliability. For 15 years, she was exactly what we needed her to be. And then, I asked, and then you turned 10 and something changed. She'd started thinking about your future, whether you'd follow her path, whether she wanted that for you. So when the committee wanted to evaluate me for recruitment in 1978, I tried to shut it down, Krasnov interrupted. I was overruled. Your mother came to me when she learned about the surveillance. She simply stated that her daughter would not follow her path, and that if the committee pushed this matter, she would find a way to become useless to us. She was too valuable to lose, and she knew it. So you protected me, I said. I buried the recruitment recommendation in bureaucracy. Eventually they forgot about you. Why are you telling me this? Because your mother asked me to. In December, 2 months before she died, she told me she'd preserved the operational files. She asked me to provide context if you discovered them, so you'd understand the choices she and Victor made. What choices? I pressed. They were ordered into a fake marriage. They had one choice, the most important one, Krasnov said quietly. They could have remained professional, kept emotional distance. Many operatives perform affection in public and maintain clinical detachment in private. But Victor and Anna didn't do that. They chose to make the marriage real, to actually become the people their legends claimed they were. That decision, to love each other authentically, that was defiance in its way. Did the committee know? We suspected, but it didn't compromise their effectiveness. What we didn't tell recruits was that your parents had subverted the entire purpose of the operation. They'd transformed their assignment into something the state couldn't fully control, a real human relationship with loyalty to each other that superseded loyalty to the committee. When did you realize they'd changed? In 1981. Your father's debriefing after a courier operation, he'd been compromised. When I explained the adjustments, his first question was, will this put Anna and Katya at risk? Not the operation, not the committee's interests. His family, his real family. You covered for them, I said. I did, multiple times. When your mother copied documents she should have returned unread. When your father investigated whether your university application had been flagged, I covered for all of it. Why? Krasnov was silent for a long time. Finally, because I spent 30 years turning people into tools, and then I had one case where the tools refused to stay broken, where two people found genuine love in the machinery designed to prevent it. I couldn't destroy that. He pulled folders from a drawer. Your mother wanted you to have these, Victor's real service record, your mother's recruitment files. She wanted you to know they weren't just legends. They were exceptional operatives who believed completely in protecting the motherland. When my father died, I said, the report said liver disease. Was that true? No. Krasnov's face closed. Your father was killed in a traffic accident in 1983, not random. He'd been meeting with a contact under surveillance. We staged the liver disease story to protect your mother's cover. My mother knew. She was debriefed the same night. Given the choice to extract or maintain cover, she chose to maintain cover. For you, she sacrificed her own grief for your protection. Why couldn't she tell me the truth while she lived? Because telling you would have forced you to make impossible choices. She wanted you to remember her as your mother, not as Agent Anna. The truth was for after, when grief had softened enough that you could understand without being destroyed by the knowledge. I left the apartment with 2 folders documenting my parents' real achievements. Outside, spring was beginning. The Soviet Union had less than 3 years left. The Berlin Wall had fallen, and soon the whole edifice would collapse. My parents' world, the world of legends and handlers, of operational marriages and surveilled childhoods, was ending. But they had lived in it, worked in it, found authentic love in it despite its design. That was their victory. Not the intelligence gathered, but the human connection they'd built in the margins of the machine. They'd been Soviet intelligence operatives, and they'd been my parents who loved me. Both things were true, both mattered. That was the legacy they'd left. The coup came in August. I watched on television as tanks rolled through Moscow, as Yeltsin called for resistance, as the apparatus my parents had served for 30 years revealed itself to be hollow, already broken. 3 days later, the Soviet Union began its final collapse. The KGB was dissolved and reformed into something else. I sat surrounded by the files my mother had preserved, trying to understand what her life's work had meant now that the state she'd served no longer existed. The phone rang in September. Katya Volkov. I'm Ingrid Schaefer, a researcher in Berlin studying Cold War intelligence operations. Your mother's name appeared in declassified Stasi documents. Would you be willing to speak with me? Something in her voice, professional, non-judgmental, made me agree. Ingrid arrived 2 weeks later. I showed her everything: the storage unit files, the photographs, my mother's letter, Krasnov's documents. She spent 3 days reading, taking notes, asking precise and respectful questions. "Your mother was remarkable," Ingrid said. "She maintained operational effectiveness while developing genuine emotional bonds that were supposed to be impossible. She integrated the contradiction instead of being destroyed by it." "How?" I asked. "She redefined success. She served 2 masters simultaneously, the state and her family, and found a way to satisfy both. She made her cover true by becoming the person she was pretending to be." Over the next year, I worked with Ingrid on her book, Legends, Children of Cold War Intelligence Operatives. Published in 1995, it told my family's story with nuance and empathy. I received letters from other children of operatives, all of us reconciling the parents we'd loved with the operatives they'd been. In 1996, I spoke at a Berlin conference on Cold War memory. "I don't know how to judge my parents," I said. "They were instruments of a security apparatus that violated human rights, but they were also individuals trying to build something meaningful. They were operatives following orders and parents who loved me. All of these things are true." In 1999, Krasnov died, leaving me one final revelation. My father had been trying to arrange extraction for our family when he was killed in 1983. He'd wanted to defect, to free us from the legends. My mother, after his death, chose to maintain cover to protect me. They'd both put family above state, love above duty. Now in 2025, I'm 62. The Cold War has been over for decades. But the human questions remain. How do we love authentically in circumstances built on lies? How do we judge people who participated in repressive systems while remaining genuinely human? My parents were legends, carefully crafted false identities maintained over decades, but they were also legends in the mythic sense, people who refused to be completely defined by the system that shaped them. The performance became real. The lie became truth. The legend became life. That's the legacy. That's what remains when the Cold War ends and only the human consequences endure.